name's Jamie Gruber, and welcome to the Multifamily and More Expert Series, where we dive deep into a specific topic with our expert guest related to the business of multifamily, mindset, or anything in between. My guest today, Joe Fairless, is a full-time real estate investor that started buying multifamily properties in 2013 and now controls over $500 million worth of real estate with a portfolio of over 5,200 units. Very impressive. He has personally raised over $100 million from private investors for real estate investments. Prior to that, he was the youngest vice president in an award-winning advertising agency in New York City. He is the host of the world's longest-running daily real estate iTunes podcast, The Best Real Estate Investing Advice Ever, where he has interviewed guests such as Barbara Corcoran, Robert Kiyosaki, Emmitt Smith, and one of my favorites, Tony Hawk. Joe's authored 3 books, The Best Real Estate Investing Advice Ever, Volumes 1 and 2, along with the best ever apartment syndication book, which is really great. I'm about a third of the way through it right now. And it provides a proven step-by-step system for completing your first syndication deal. Joe has been featured on Forbes, Yahoo Finance, Huffington Post, and was named 2018 Multifamily Investor of the Year by Think Realty. That and much, much more you can find out about Joe at joefairless.com. So Joe, welcome and thanks for being here.
Jamie, looking forward to it. That's a lot of information about me. You refreshed my memory on some of that stuff. That's pretty. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm grateful to be talking to you and looking forward to this.
Same. No, it's an impressive lineup for sure. So, Joe, for the expert series, we're going to focus in on something that you get into early in your book, which is, I think the chapter starts with it's all about the brand, baby, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. So, you've been a big proponent of creating what you call a thought platform. So I wanted to kind of, your background in advertising I get, but what are the beginnings of this? Where did this come from? Why do you put so much emphasis on this?
Yeah, I call it a thought leadership platform because the challenge that most people have whenever they enter the larger deals is they lack credibility, and among many things. I lack credibility and money, which tends to be fairly common. And the reason why having a thought leadership platform, which let's define it first, a thought leadership platform is a YouTube channel, a blog, a podcast, even a meetup like you have so successfully done. And the reason why it is important is because when we as real estate investors go to another level in our investing career, we've got to have the credibility among those around us to be attractive enough to attract them into our ventures. And that can not only includes our private investors who are passively investing in our deals, but also includes brokers, property managers, accountants, attorneys, all of those individuals and groups who have opportunities to partner up with other sponsors who have more of a track record, or they've known them longer, or they have an in with them. Well, we've got to differentiate ourselves and be top of mind in a relevant way. And so how we overcome the challenge of having a lack of track record and a lack of network, well, we interview others like you're doing to bring them into our circle, number one, but then number two, to learn from them. And then number three, now your format's a bit unique because it's a closed circuit format, but most podcasts and other things I do an interview on, when it's released, I then share it out to my audience because it's publicly available, which then brings more people into the host community and the person doing the interviewing. And so it's a wonderful benefit to the host because then the host has the benefit of gaining a new audience after every time they interview someone. And by doing that, we're associating ourselves as a host. By doing that, we're associating ourselves with others who have that track record, have that experience, and now our investors or potential investors, they see us associating with others who have that experience, and then they start coming to us with large multifamily questions or investing in deals, passively investing, versus them going other places. And the best way to build a relationship with someone is to educate them and do it in a way that adds a whole lot of value, and they seek out information. And I don't just talk about this stuff. As you mentioned, I've got the world's longest running daily real estate investing podcast. I've interviewed more real estate investors than anyone else in the entire world. Nobody else that I'm aware of has interviewed at least 1,600 real estate investors. So, when I started out the podcast about 4-ish years ago, I didn't have the relationships that I have today. But after 1,600 interviews, I'm going to build some relationships and learn a couple things along the way. So there's a lot of benefits to having a thought leadership platform. But the main thing is, if you're just starting out or looking to take your business to another level, you must have something where people can check in on you at their leisure when it's convenient for them, versus when you reach out to them about a deal, it may or may not be convenient to them, and you're just talking about them about a transaction versus really adding value to their life.
Makes sense. So you started, I believe, this podcast based on a challenge from a coach of yours.
Yes.
And great challenge, because it worked out well for you.
Worked out well. Yeah.
What were the beginnings of this, though, for you? What was the first step? Like, I guess the question is almost like, how intentional was it for you to create a thought leadership platform from the beginning? Or was it something where you did something else, had an aha, and then, this podcast was the next natural iteration of that? I guess, what was the beginnings of this, and how intentional was it for you to create what you've created today?
Well, I didn't know, I didn't have the term thought leadership platform in my mind. I didn't think of it that way. All I did is, initially I was looking at, and just a little bit of backstory, because you mentioned my life coach. He did say, yeah, you should do a podcast similar to Entrepreneur on Fire. And I'm so grateful that he mentioned Entrepreneur on Fire and not Tim Ferriss or some other podcast, because Entrepreneur on Fire was, at the time, they don't do it anymore, they've decreased the amount of episodes, a daily podcast. And so I immediately was exposed to, and I was not a podcast listener, nor am I really still I listen to Tim Ferriss, but besides that, I don't listen to any podcasts. I didn't have any frame of reference for podcasts at the time. And so what I was exposed to initially was a daily entrepreneurial podcast, Entrepreneur on Fire. And so I didn't know there wasn't other podcasts out there that weren't doing it daily. I just assumed, oh, he's doing it daily, I should do it daily too.
Right.
So initially, when I launched, I didn't know if it was a good use of my time. I was interviewing people, I was releasing episodes, but I wasn't sure if I was getting anywhere with it. And I was not getting any listeners saying, hey, I love this episode. I don't think anyone was really listening to it, quite frankly, at the beginning. My mom, my dog, that's about it. That's all who were listening to the podcast. But what I did is this was in, we'll call it September, might have been October of, I think 2014. I said, you know what? I'm going to do a daily episode for the rest of the year, and then I'm going to make a decision at that point if this is an effective use of my time. And ideally, what the way to measure that will be is if I can get a sponsor to sponsor in January the podcast. That way I can at least break even monetarily with the podcast, and then I know the relationships that I built most likely, although I didn't know at the time, most likely will be beneficial. Well, spoiler alert, turns out those relationships are much more beneficial than any sponsorship dollars. But what I did is I did every episode for September, October, November, and December, every day, did an interview, and I did everything. I found the guests, I did the show notes, I interviewed them, I taught myself editing. I'm not a technical person, but I taught myself editing software. I used Audacity. I have an editor now. Posted on social media, notified the guests that the interview went live. I did it all. And so I did it through that time. And then in December, I interviewed a guest. His name is Lucas Hall. and he at the time was at Landlordology, but he had just moved over to Cozy.co, and he founded Landlordology.com, and then he moved over to Cozy.co. I think Cozy.co got bought Landlordology, and I reached out to him about sponsoring the podcast, and he and his company Cozy.co sponsored. They were my first sponsor in January, and they sponsored for a month, covered the costs of the podcast editing for me to then farm that out to an editor, and then off I went. I was able to start scaling it, and then the more the sponsorship dollars increased, the fewer responsibilities that I gave myself, and then now we're today, 4 years later, I'm just doing the interviewing. That is it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a team that does the rest.
That's amazing. And, really, there's two things. One or the other is, to me, it seems an obstruction, a mindset obstruction for folks when they're diving into this multifamily arena. Was for me, I'm sure it was for you at one point as well. It's raising capital or finding deals, right? Those are the two big things. So for you, you mentioned how building the relationships with folks that you've interviewed, folks that you brought into your sphere, if you will, has benefited you. That was your spoiler alert. Without giving any names, can you give just some quick examples, a run through of how this podcast has helped you in your capital raising efforts and or deal finding efforts?
Oh, sure. Well, I'll use a specific example. I interviewed a gentleman who I found on Bigger Pockets, and I said, I'd love to interview you. He's a commercial real estate investor. He was local. I live in Cincinnati. He's local. And I interviewed him. We became friends. He's invested significant capital in our deals, probably he's definitely top 10 investor for total capital per investor in our deals. And our families are really good friends now. So we're actually going to hang out with them this weekend and see him regularly. And he has referred a lot of investors to us just because he believes in us, and he's that kind of person. He champions. He's a champion of those who he believes in, and because he does that, he gets rewarded a lot from the people who he champions, because we want to do whatever the hell we can do to help him out, and so we all kind of continue to rise as a result of it. That's just one, but I can tell you that when investors reach out to me and they put as a referral source the Best Ever Podcast, which is my podcast, the conversation is it's much shorter because there's not a Q&A of who am I, can you tell me more about your business? Because they already know who I am. They already know about business. It's more to the point and more effective. That's what I'm looking for. The conversation's a much more effective conversation because of my podcast. So because they're asking specific questions versus general questions, so we can get to know each other a little bit more. Now I get to know them and I ask about them, but they already know about me. And the amount of time that has saved me over the last 4 years is, I don't know, probably 6 months worth of time that it's saved me, because our conversations are much more efficient and effective.
Makes sense. That makes perfect sense. You mentioned a very quick follow-up on that. You mentioned how you met this gentleman, he ended up investing with you and bringing other people to invest with you. Obviously that's not just because, you're a nice guy. What were the other, if you can get a little more intricate on the steps after that, does he give you a test run? Do you perform for him? And then here it comes, as far as him bringing capital or bringing people with capital. How did you cultivate that to the point where not only was he going to give you, a lot of capital to fund your deals, but also bring other people into your world?
So his example probably isn't as applicable to, isn't as common as other examples, but you asked the question, so I'll answer it. With him, I interviewed him probably, I haven't looked at this, but I'm thinking about 6 months later. we had a deal, and he had seen other deals prior to this. We had a deal, and he's like, you know what? Let's meet for lunch. Let's talk about it. We met, and he brought his probably at the time maybe 3-4-year-old kid with him, and he said, I looked at the deal. I'm in for, I think it was like 300,000 or something on the first deal. And he's like, that was easy, wasn't it? I was like, yeah, that was pretty easy. And he's like, all right, let's have lunch, let's hang out. And that was it. I mean, he and then after that, we hadn't done a deal full cycle with him in it, but we had done a significant refinance on a deal that he was in where he got a large chunk of his equity back. And then he brought in a family member, and you know, as recent, and now he's just referring a bunch of people. As recently as this morning, I got an email from him referring a couple. So it was over time, but it happened. When it happened, then it happened a lot with him. Whereas I think the larger lesson for people who are listening, who are looking to raise capital from investors, is that every investor is going to go about it at their own speed based on their personality and their, you know, how they think about it. I get the question fairly frequently on a new investor called Joe, if I've got $1 million to invest, then would you recommend that I put all $1 million in one of your deals or spread it out, 100K per deal? And I tell them I'm not an investment advisor, so I cannot give you advice, but that gives you an idea, which doesn't help them at all, unfortunately, but I can't. But it gives you an idea of how different people think. And that's what's important here, is everyone has their own approach. Some people, they want to put all $1 million in one deal. Some, they want to spread it out. And some, they just don't know and they're looking for help. And so no investor is going to be the same with how they approach it. Some are going to, you know, start slow. Some are going to go start fast and just stay that way. I think the key here, though, is with the Thought Leadership platform, it's staying relevant and top of mind with your investors on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually basis. I have what's called a accredited investor engagement plan that I have. It's a spreadsheet, and it lists out all the things my team and I do on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually basis to stay in touch with our investors. Top of mind, adding value in a relevant way. And being intentional about it is what's important. There's a book called Ninja Selling by, I think his name's Larry Kindle, and the book's written for real estate agents. I'm not a real estate agent, but it's got some relevant things in there, and that's where I got the staying in touch daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually, and then being intentional about it, because he talks about, as a real estate agent, say you did a phenomenal job, you found a couple, their house, their dream home, congratulations, they love you, they even wrote you a Google review. Well, in 3 years, when they're looking to move again, are they going to come to you? Maybe, maybe not. If you haven't stayed in touch with them in a relevant way over the period of time, and especially at that 3-year mark, when they're looking to find a new place and sell their home, they might have forgotten about you, even though you did everything right 3 years prior. So the key is to stay in touch through newsletters, email and mailed out newsletters, which I do, mail out newsletters to my investors, have some sort of podcast with something like that, and stay top of mind, so that when there is a decision, in our case, where they're looking to invest, they know exactly who to go to.
You know, I think it's a great point. I love the accredited investor plan. I don't know if it's in the book. I haven't gotten there yet. But you know, the question may have been a bit presumptuous on my point in saying, obviously it wasn't because you're a nice guy, because your point's really valid that it depends on the investor, right? This guy brought his son, I know that, some folks bring their spouse, and, that just it humanizes the
Mhm.
relationship between potential investor and, investor and potential fund, capital source, right? It
Yep.
personalizes that. So to your point, it was because you were a nice guy that he test ran with you on $300,000, which isn't a ton of money for some. It's a lot of money no matter what, either way. But it's, for him, maybe it was a test drive amount. When you showed performance, obviously, then the floodgates opened, it sounded like. But I asked a commercial lender once who was talking about the 5 C's of lending, one of them being character, like what he considers before lending. And I just asked him, how important is that? And he goes, it's the first thing. If you're not somebody of good character, if you're just not somebody I feel we can work with, all the other credit, capital, all the other C's, they're really irrelevant. So it just goes to the point, and it's a great point that you made, that it's a people business, right? It's all about the ability to relate and be present and be visible and have a relationship with people. So I think that's great. So my question for you now, as we wrap up here, is, you're out there, you're out in front, you've got the podcast, you've got the book. I know you host a meetup locally. You've got a Facebook group for that. There's things that you have out there to kind of keep you and your brand present and visible. For folks like me, starting out, a couple deals under my belt, kind of building toward something bigger, wanting to leverage, as you outlined, the thought leadership platform. What is your role today in front of a $500 million company versus maybe what it was then? Like, so you're obviously always going to be involved to some extent in the day-to-day, or I shouldn't say obviously, I'm sure you are, but is the thought leadership platform where you spend most of your time, or is it elsewhere?
No, it's not where I spend most of my time. So I do my interviews on Thursdays, and I interview 9 people on Thursday. So I spend my Thursdays interviewing people for the podcast, and then that books me out for not only a week, but then a little bit after that. So as of now, we're like 60 days booked out. So when I interview someone this Thursday, that's going to air in about 60 days.
Mm-hmm.
That way, if something were to come up, then we've got some cushion. So no, Thursdays is just thought leadership. Other than that, I don't do anything with it. I've got a team in place that does social media and all that other stuff. As far as the focus, my main focus is working with our investors and speaking to new investors. That's the primary role that I have within Ashcroft. It's also assessing new opportunities. I was just on a call with Frank, the co-founder of our company, and then Scott, he's director of acquisitions, and we were talking about 2 deals. One is in Jacksonville, the other is in Dallas-Fort Worth. And from that conversation, we decided not to pursue the one in Jacksonville that we were about to be invest in final on, but just didn't make sense. Prices getting crazy. But the one in Dallas, it makes a lot of sense, so we're going to pursue. So I am involved in acquisitions, as well as some asset management, but primary role is investor relations. So what my day looks like is speaking to new investors, and then also helping oversee the Ashcroft portfolio, as well as working with the marketing team to make sure that the thought leadership platform and all the components of it are running and optimized the right way. We get at least 3 new leads every day of people who fill out the form to say we want to invest with you, and that's people who have said they're U.S. citizens, they want to invest at least $50,000, they are accredited investors because we only work with accredited investors, and so that's how they qualify themselves. So we get at least 3 of those a day, and so it's our team who responds to them, and then they set up a call and I speak to every one of them personally, so that we develop that relationship, because we do our offerings through 506B as in boy, so we have to have that pre-existing relationship before we share any deals with them.
Makes sense. All right, great. Joe, this was great. A lot of great information. The book recommendation, Ninja Selling, makes a lot of sense. I love the accredited investor plan. Anywhere else people can find out more about you or what you're all about?
I think you covered it. Well, one thing, if you want a apartment resources guide, I'd be happy to give that to you. Just email info@joefairless.com. And Bonnie, my executive assistant, she will respond to email and give you the apartment resources guide. Just gives you a bunch of resources for market research and other ways you can learn more about apartment investing. So info@joefairless.com.
Great. Thanks
And
again.
mention that you heard about it from this podcast too. That way we can get it to you.
Perfect. No, I appreciate it. Thanks again for your time today. And yeah, hope you have a great day.
All right. Thanks, Jamie.
All right. Appreciate it.